Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessin. This is Colorado State of Mind. Tonight we'll continue our special report, Losing Ground, from iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll talk with Ray Aguilera of the Pueblo City Council about the ground that was lost in Colorado when major manufacturing began to disappear. But first, Colorado will be the site of a major energy conference coming up 2 weeks from now in Vail and Beaver Creek. The Vail Global Energy Forum will bring together some major figures, including former U.S. Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury George Shultz, outgoing Chairman of the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee Jeff Bingaman, as well as energy experts Tom Petrie, Admiral Gary Roughead, and Jim Brown, the Western Hemisphere President of Halliburton. With those big names comes a big agenda for the forum to discuss how to provide the energy necessary to support a sustainable global economy in an increasingly green, secure, and affordable way. Joining us tonight with more is the Executive Director of the Vail Global Energy Forum, Colby, and the Vice President of Public Affairs and Security for Vail Resorts International, Beth Ganz. Carl, I know that this is the second year for this major undertaking. What are the areas you'll be discussing when this starts in March?
We're going to concentrate on three areas that are really hot-button issues, particularly in this climate. One is hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling and the whole natural gas story, which is a terrific story really for Colorado as well, because people are very environmentally aware in Colorado, very conscious of preserving their natural treasures here. At the same time, it's an energy-producing state. So Jim Brown, as you say, of Halliburton, will speak about the actual processes of the extraction. And Mark Zoback is coming from Stanford. He's a geophysicist who's telling us really this science story. What is the situation? How do you actually drill for gas in that environment? And then Governor Hickenlooper is going to begin the whole event on Saturday with a keynote. And I think he's quite fantastic usually, because he gives a very terrific overview with the consciousness of really, again, that environmental awareness to make sure that citizens are protected at the same time to keep industry alive. So I'd say natural gas story, also a big energy efficiency story about driving behavioral modification. It's like we've said 50 years ago or 30 years ago, people would be smoking. What happened? No one smokes. But now people are becoming more energy efficient. And it's because of smart meters and consciousness and using your iPhone to program your house temperature and things like that. And then the last one is financial markets. What is the future of renewables, and how do we move on, let's say, out of fossil fuels and out of natural gas into the renewables, and what's the market for that? And so that's kind of three of the big top items that we have.
And that sounds fascinating to people who are in or out of energy, I would say. Beth, Vail has been embarked for several years now on trying to be more sustainable. Big energy consumer and user. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that get going?
Sure. We are thrilled to be supporting and hosting the conference at Vail and Beaver Creek, because it aligns so perfectly with our sustainability work. And our focus, as you said, has been on energy conservation. In 2008, we launched a campaign to reduce our energy use by 10%. And within 3 years, we reduced our electricity and natural gas by 10.75%. And the same day that we reached it, we said, okay, let's go for another 10. So we're now in another campaign to reduce our energy use by another 10% by 2020. And I think we're a great daily example, actually, of the second topic of the conference, giving our employees, tracking our energy use, giving employees that information, empowering them to create and identify innovative ideas for us to be more efficient, and truly investing significant dollars and more capital to have more energy efficient practices in our operations.
Carl, I read that the founder of the conference, or of the forum, wants to see a Socratic dialogue between people who may not always agree. Is that right?
Well, one of the great things about doing this in Colorado, and particularly the Vail Valley, and really, frankly, the entire state, is that I spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., where things are rather contentious, obviously. And Colorado...
No, not really.
But Colorado seems to be a place that has very pragmatic people. And we're not partisan. We're not waving a particular flag. We just want to know what are the facts and what are the choices that we could have moving forward. So we're very conscious, because of our affiliation with Stanford and with Jay Precourt, who really laid out the vision for this, is to have this dialogue. And something like natural gas, which is a hot-button story, but why not bring in the president of Western Hemisphere, Halliburton, who's going to know about what happens at the wellhead. And why not bring in a Mark Zoback, who is a geophysicist who has no agenda. He just wants to tell you at a certain feet, above or below the water table, etc., things are happening. And then Governor Hickenlooper, who has to wrestle with these ideas every day. He's got constituents who are people who want the environment absolutely pristine, and he also needs people who have jobs. So it's going to be an open discussion, and I think that's the whole spirit of the Colorado that we like and that we want to promote.
Who would be on that side of keeping everything very pristine? Who do you have who represents that thinking in this lineup? I
would say some of the people like Kathy Zoy. She was Undersecretary of Energy for Renewables under the first Obama administration, and now she's with C3, which is an energy company that's really working on all the aspects of the smart grid, how to drive efficiency. She's probably one of the top spokespeople on renewables. She understands wind energy, she understands solar, and she's already looking 25 years ahead to when hopefully we might be energy independent and natural gas might get us partway there. But we've got to start making that commitment, and Vail Resorts is doing that. I mean, they buy a lot of their energy from wind and from other sources, and I think they're a leader in the community in terms of how far-sighted you can be. Start now. It might take a while, but start now and get going.
Is there some part of this, Beth, that is contemplating how the climate may change going forward for resorts that depend on snow?
Well, I mean, certainly I think climate change is a huge issue facing our planet. Whether or not it's important actually for skiing in comparison to the things that it's important for, whether habitat, melting ice caps, more intense storms, and how it'll affect the people and wildlife across our planet, I think are the real issues. But certainly, our efforts around energy conservation and reducing our energy use has great effect in reducing our footprint. And we thought, when looking at sort of how we can have the greatest impact, reducing our footprint and having less of an impact just made sense, both for the environment and for our business, because we are more efficient in how we run our business as we look to conserve energy. So it's a great sustainable model, and by making sure that for all businesses, making sure that you institute truly sustainable practices, ones that are both good for, that benefit all stakeholders, that are good for the environment, good for the community, engage our employees, create the best product we possibly can for our guests, and are good for the business, then you ensure really that you guarantee that those changes in operations will last over time. And I think we've found the greatest success in the practices that we've changed and altered when we've looked to really how we can benefit all of our stakeholders.
Carl, one thing I think is really great about the conference, the forum, I keep saying conference, right, but it's both, I guess, is how many students you have coming. These are students who are studying these areas. Well,
it's important from the beginning, and Jay Precourt really laid this down as a model, and also our supporters in the Vail Valley, and particularly Vail Resorts, etc. I mean, they're the future. And to bring 80 students on a scholarship basis, it really helps. And also, it's $200 for one of the signature packages, which gets you in both days, breakfast, lunch, and all kinds of other things, and Energy Village. So it's very inclusive. A lot of energy conferences are either trade shows where if you're not one of the chosen few who actually knows that world, then you're not invited. Or it's extremely expensive, put on by some big publication. But we're open. We want the dialogue. And I think so people can buy tickets, and I'm sure you'll flash our www whatever out there, but we are very keen to do this, and I think that part of the students being involved is really the best, because they drive the future, and they drive people thinking, I can't just stay the way we are. We have to take the resources we have and the energies that we have and improve ourselves.
Right.
Where do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, we've seen a lot of interest from the folks in operations who work with energy and energy conservation measures every day. They're very excited about the conference and to be able to attend, which is great.
It's really the can-do spirit that I think is really essential to the American character. That's what I see in Colorado. I mean, I don't see a lot of people arguing these. What they do is they want to know more, and then they want to find out what can we do to solve the problem. And in other places, I mentioned Washington, not a lot gets done. But now with the mandates we have, we're also going to hear firsthand what's the new administration, Obama administration, proposing. We just had the State of the Union. Now we're going to hear from 2 or 3 people who were in the first administration, very high positions, and Senator Bingaman, who ran the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And so you'll hear what are the prognoses, what are things going forward in the short term.
Well, we will look forward to hearing the news out of the Vail Global Energy Forum, March 2nd and 3rd in Colorado. Thank you, Carl Colby and Beth Ganz.
Thank you.
Now, the next installment of the iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS special report, Losing Ground. Tonight, we look at the changing economy. For example, in the 1960s, the giant CF&I steel plant on the south end of Pueblo was the economic driving engine and racial equalizer for Colorado's southernmost city. iNews' Joe Mahoney gives us the video picture of then and now with longtime city leader Ray Aguilera. And after the video, we'll be back to talk to Aguilera and iNews senior reporter Kevin Vaughan.
I want to tell you, I thought, Pueblo was Shangri-La, I mean, it was a period of prosperity. Everybody worked, there was, 6,000, 7,000 people working at the mill. And why would somebody want to go to college when you could go out to the mill here and make $60,000, $70,000 a year? The CF&I began to wane because of the way they manufactured steel, and everything changed. It was terrible, the thought of losing all those jobs and them closing this plant was, it was absolutely a nightmare, the way the community felt.
Our thanks to Joe Mahoney for that video piece. And now we can talk with Ray Aguilera, who is in our Rocky Mountain PBS studio in Pueblo at KTSC. Ray, I know you were very involved with what happened after CF&I closed in trying to diversify the Pueblo economy. Who did you work with at that time? What were you doing? What called you to get involved?
Actually, right now, the CF&I is probably stronger than it's ever been. But they found a way of making as much steel today as they did then. It took them 8,000 employees to make the steel that they made. Now they make the same amount of steel and better quality with 1,500. And this process that they use scrap metal, and they stick these 2 electrical rods into this pot, and with a matter of minutes, they create this molten mass of metal, and the process, really is what saved the CF&I now. And last quarter, they made more money than they've ever made. And so the 1,500 jobs that we have here are really good paying jobs.
Those are great.
But at the time that we had the 8,000 employees, it was just a drain, and it was going downstream.
So changing processes in manufacturing had a lot to do with this. Kevin, as you were working on the Losing Ground report, we noted that in 1970, was it 1 in 4 Hispanic Coloradans had jobs in manufacturing, these good-paying jobs?
Right.
It was a path to the middle class.
It was, and today that number is less than 1 in 10. As Ray talked about, there's just been a dramatic change in the number of manufacturing jobs that are available in Colorado. In 1970, for example, about 14% of the workforce in the state was employed in a manufacturing job, and today that number's down around 7.5%. We saw the dramatic changes at CF&I Steel in Pueblo. We saw changes in Denver with Gates Rubber, the plant here closing, and with Samsonite suitcases and other places. And so a huge number of jobs that people used to be able to get into maybe with a high school diploma and that were on a path toward economic prosperity, they don't exist in this state anymore.
Ray mentioned the other businesses that were lured into Pueblo in this economic development effort. To what extent has that diversification helped in replacing those jobs?
The diversification has replaced the jobs, but one of the things that's happened is a lot of those jobs are more exclusive. In other words, you need to be college educated now for a lot of these jobs. And one of the things that we found in researching, losing ground, is that the disparity between Latinos and African Americans and whites in terms of having college degrees is greater than it's ever been. So much of this research for us was sort of a good news, bad news scenario. For example, African American adults today, a much higher percentage of them have high school diplomas than did 40 or 50 years ago. But a high school diploma doesn't mean the same thing today it meant then. It really is now a college diploma that is the key to a lot of the jobs that are in Colorado.
Ray, I know your family goes back 100 years in Pueblo, and there are several institutions of higher education there. Is there any kind of effort to help more Hispanic and other minority students finish college?
Well, we really work hard to try to get our kids to go to school, but when they did the article, I tell this quick story, but there was a little girl who wrote a letter, and this was in 1996, and she wrote to the newspaper and said that she wanted to know what happened to all her classmates, and that when she started at Central, there were 396 kids in her freshman class, but when she graduated, there was only 187 kids who graduated. And so we had been asking the wrong questions. We were asking what the dropout was, and we should have been asking what the persistence rate was. How many kids start as freshmen, and how many kids actually graduate?
That is a good story, a good illustration of what you're talking about. So are dropout rates higher in the Pueblo high schools?
Well, we're working really hard to find reasons to keep our kids in school. And, sometimes it's not always academics that keeps our kids in school. It's other activities. It's the football or cheerleading. But we're working very hard down here to try and find ways to keep our kids in school. And we're trying to, in fact, at Central, we would like to introduce in the fall the opportunity to become an electrician in our high school, where the kids would go to school and then take some electrical classes while they're at Central. Because an electrician, the one thing you have to be able to do is you have to pass a college algebra. And so if we could get our kids thinking about that while they're in high school, we think these are some of the reasons that we could keep our kids in school.
That sounds like a good idea. And that is true, Kevin, isn't it? That the education that's needed for some of these jobs, as you mentioned, can be different kinds of education. It might be the practical thing of getting a certificate as a plumber rather than finishing 4 years of liberal arts.
Right, at a trade school or something like that. I think that's very true.
This has led to falling family income over those years.
Absolutely. We found that in 1970, for example, African American family income in Colorado was about 73% of white family income, and Latino family income was about 72% of white family income. Today, those numbers are 60% and 50%, respectively. And there are a lot of reasons to talk about that's played into that. Education is just one of them. One of the dynamics that we've seen that affects the economy and affects this disparity are births to single mothers, which are going up dramatically, especially in minority communities, and households headed by a single parent. And in both cases, it's a tremendous predictor of poverty, and it's also, it's just math. If you have one adult in the home, your earning potential for your family is half what it would be if you have two adults in the home. And so there's education, but there's also social dynamics that play into these economic realities today.
And Ray, you have a zip code in Pueblo that is pretty interesting. Talk about that.
Well, we have a zip code 81001, and it has the largest number of children being raised by grandparents. And, I think those kids are well taken care of by the grandparents.
No doubt.
But generally, what happens is when our kids start to school, there's no computers in the home in this information age because cable is too expensive for a lot of families to be able to have computers in the home, and there's not as much written material, books and things for kids to read. So actually here in Pueblo, I think a lot of our Hispanic kids and poor black kids and poor white kids, they start 2 or 3 years behind. And some of them, and maybe it's even the majority, never have the ability to catch up. And so it really puts us at a disadvantage to try to get those kids so that they can read by the time they're in the 3rd grade.
Yes, that's certainly the place to start, isn't it, at the earlier age. And what are Pueblo officials doing to bring in now other types of jobs that could be filled by people with any specific education?
Well, we are working hard at bringing jobs, and we have 3 new companies coming to Pueblo. One of them makes chains. Another company makes railroad ties out of cement. And so we have some new companies coming, but I just want to tell you, in Sunday's paper, the CFNI, or the Everest company, the steel company, they had 4 ads in the paper, and 2 were for electricians, and 1 was for a pipe fitter, and the other was for a machinist. So that gives you an idea that the steel plant is looking for employees who have really high skills. And, those are all skills that you have to go to our community college to get. And so that's what the needs are here in town. And everybody requires a high school diploma. You can't get a job here in Pueblo, I think even in McDonald's, without having a high school diploma. But, that's just the beginning. We need to help our kids realize that they need to put a value on education, and they need to go to a community college to either get a certificate or to get some training so that they could go out and make a wage that will pay them enough to be able to survive.
And that, of course, is important to those individual students and their families, but it's important to the health of the community as well, isn't it?
It is. We can't survive, and that's why we're really working hard down here to help our kids, provide them with scholarship, give them the skills in mathematics that they need to be able to go to good schools. We're working real hard. And I did want to make a little comment about the new immigrants that are coming. I think that they really are on fire, and it seems like their kids in school do better than the Hispanic kids who have been here 2 or 3 generations. This new set of immigrants that we have coming are very ambitious, and they are hardworking. And so I know that there's a fear about bringing immigrants to this country, but immigrants are what have made this country. And so I think we need to continue to find ways to educate them and make them better employees.
Thank you so much for some interesting insights. Ray Aguilera in Pueblo, and also here in Denver, senior reporter Kevin Vaughan from iNews at Rocky Mountain PBS. You may see this program again at video.rmpbs.org. 2 weeks from now, we're going to bring you the final installment of Losing Ground, a closer look at the socio-economic toll on minority Colorado families over several decades. Now, next week, a special edition featuring Colorado women who each make a part of our world. You'll meet Denver's Deputy Mayor, Carrie Kennedy, the founder of the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center, Sherry Schenk, and Jill Teachin, the author of her story, A Timeline of Women Who Changed America. We'll also hear from Colorado's Linda Alvarado, who is one of the featured women included in an upcoming national PBS special called Makers. So we hope you'll join us for the Colorado Makers next week, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm Cynthia Hessin. Kevin, I didn't realize until we sat down today that you had family who had worked at CFNI. Did you grow up in Pueblo?
I did not, but my mom was born there, and her parents were born there, and all of her grandparents were either born there or came there as children. And my great-grandfather graduated from high school in Pueblo in 1908 and went into the steel mill later that year.